Welcome to the CAD Office Training Series for FDOT Connect for OpenBridge Modeler. My name is Brandon Leifer and I'm a structural engineer with WSP USA. In this video, we will be covering exercise 8.1 from the Bridge Design 3D Modeling and Plans course guide. This exercise demonstrates how to do solid modifications to the beams and end vents as needed for FDOT standards. Let's get started. For today's exercise, we will start off with learning what are solid modifications, when should they be done, what do they entail, and we will continue with clipping the top flanges of beams and also modifying an end vent to turn the back wall radial at the gutter line and also to add a vertical and horizontal lug. So, what are solid modifications? Solid modifications can be summarized as any use of the OBM modeling tools outside of the standardly generated items to enhance the bridge geometry. In our case, those modifications will be the clipping of the beam top flanges, the turning of the back wall / end vent, and vertical / horizontal lugs. In the modeling workflow under the Solids tab is where you will find the great majority of all useful OBM solid modifications tools that you can use to enhance your bridge geometry. Solid modifications should only be done once the rest of the 3D bridge elements have been generated and checked. Oftentimes, making changes to the model's elements with the MicroStation 3D modeling tools can make those elements unable to be altered with the OBM bridge modeling tools after the fact. We highly recommend doing a save as version of the model for backup. One pre-solids mods and one post-solids mods would be extremely helpful in case something goes wrong or needs to be updated after the fact. If you have been following sequentially in the course guide, please feel free to continue using your already existing DGN. However, for today's video, we will be using the 8.1 begin file that accompanies the course guide. Let's make sure we are in the FDOT workspace and in the correct work set before we select our file. Before we begin modifying the beam ends, let's get to a different view and also turn off the decks and barriers to ensure we have a clear view of the beams. In order to do this, I'll navigate to View 2, and I will also navigate to the Explorer, which has the bridge model, where I then can select bridges. I can select our bridge, go down to Units, and turn off decks and barriers. Now we have a clear view of the beams. To continue, let's get a clear view of beam 1 at end vent 1. I will also turn off this reference that is in green. Following the course guide, we will be using the chamfer tool, which can be found under the modeling workflow, the solids tab, and here. We will now change the method to be distance and angle, and also update these values to match the course guide. Now that the chamfer values are set, we can go ahead and apply the chamfer by clicking in the corner of the desired chamfer location. If you selected the wrong corner inadvertently, you can right-click to cycle through the available options. So I'll right-click here once, right-click here again, and now that I have the correct visual chamfer shown, I will left-click to continue. And I'll do the same for the beam end here. Visually, the chamfer looks good. However, let's do a top view and also a different view to make sure that the chamfer was indeed placed correctly. In all views, the chamfer seems to have been placed correctly, so I will now go ahead and repeat these steps for the next 4 beams. We will now do the same for the beams at the front face and back wall of end bent 3, but now with a skew angle of 13.8760. As you can see, we have the correct corner, but now we will need to click the reverse chamfer option. Now that all of our beam flanges have been clipped, we can continue with the next section of this tutorial, which is modifying the end bend. Following the course guide, we will now use the Explorer to turn on the elements we previously turned off, and we'll use the level display to only leave the 3D elements of the end bent and barrier on. I will also turn back on the alignment that was previously turned off. We will now begin laying out construction lines for our use of solid modifying end bent 1. To start, we will go to the right side of end bent 1 and tentative snap to where the front face of the back wall meets the right gutter line. We will then make a perpendicular line from that point to the end of the end bent as shown. We will make this line DD construction and also change the Z value as shown to be 105 feet for both the start and end of the line. We now need to create a new line that intersects at the back face of the back wall and the gutter line. The course guide details a way to do this using the parallel tool. My preferred method is to copy the line we already made and move it into place using tentative snap and then confirming that the Z coordinates are still the 105 that we designated previously. We will now move these two lines to the non-plotting element level. We will also turn off the barrier level, and we will ensure that this line is indeed at the intersection and trim it as necessary. In this case, no trimming was required. We will now switch to view 2 and copy these lines up 15 feet. In this view, we will also turn off the barrier concrete. We will now construct surfaces with the newly created lines. We will do this by navigating to the Modeling Workflow and the Surfaces tab. We will then select Construct Surface and then by Edges. Proceed by left-clicking the created lines along with their vertical copy and then left-clicking twice to confirm and create the surface. We will now thicken these surfaces to make them 3D elements, and then use the trim tool to cut down the cheek wall and the end bent as necessary. To review what we have done so far and give context to what is going on, we started with 2D lines that were then transformed into surfaces that were then transformed into 3D elements. We used these 3D elements to manipulate the OBM generated pieces of the end bent and end bent cheek wall. So now that we've used 2D to 3D elements to cut the end bent, let's create new 2D to 3D elements to add a piece to the end bent. That piece being this missing gap here between the cheek wall and the front face of the back wall. To start, we will first create a 2D section that will need to be extended in order to create the 3D chunk. To begin, we will create some new smart lines. I want to extend this smart line. However, I've had issues doing it before. So a way you can do that is to move it out of place, extend it to some arbitrary point, and then use snaps to move it back into place. We will now do some clever trimming to make sure that the final 3D element we create can properly be united with the end vent. For context, when using the Unite tool, if two of the 3D elements aren't properly touching or within the limits of each other, then you will get many errors. So what you're seeing here is me moving the extrude along path to be well within the end vent cap so that this is not an issue. The last step is to now create the 2D surface that we want to extrude along the extended line that we have modified. To do this, I will use the Place Smart Line tool again and the points shown to create a surface. Once that surface has been created, you can navigate to the modeling workflow, where under Solids you will find Extrude Along. You can then use that Extrude Along tool to create a 3D element based on the surface that you have created. Now that our trunk is in place, we can unite it with the rest of the end vent. To do this, you can use the Unite tool, which can be found under the Solids tab of the modeling workflow. Be sure to click the end vent first, as it is the parent, and the chunk that we have generated second, as it is the child. Now that this side of the end vent is done, let's move on to the other side, which is a bit more difficult. As we conceptualize what will need to take place in order to get this end vent done properly, we can see here from this top view that we need to move the back wall over here, we need to trim the back wall over here, and we also need to extend the cheek wall in this portion. Going back to view 1, we will do something similar to the left side of the end vent that we did to the right. We will start by creating 2D lines, making those 2D lines into surfaces, using a surface to then create a 3D chunk, and then from there, trimming and uniting as necessary to get the desired outcome. We can start by drawing the same 2 lines we did at the beginning of modifying the right side of this end vent. That first line will be a smart line from the gutter line and the front face of the back wall to the end of the end vent. Similar as before, we will also create a parallel copy of this line at the intersection of the gutter lane and the back face of the back wall. Confirm again that the newly created line also has a Z elevation of 105 for both the begin and end. With our construction lines now in place, we can turn off the barrier line work. I'm taking another step here to confirm that the newly created line at the back face of the back wall and the gutter line truly does go to the end of the end vent as I intended to. To do that, I will create a smart line going along the end of the end vent, and I will trim the created line before from the back face of the back wall and the gutter line to match that new extent. With that now done, I'll go back to view 2 and copy these lines 15 feet up as before. Of the 3 mentioned modifications needed for the left side of the end vent before, we will start by trimming the back wall. Let's turn off the end vent cheek wall concrete PM level to get a better view of just the end vent cap and back wall. Next, we will draw the 2 construction lines shown. We will also draw a copy of the top of the cap shown here. Similar to before, I want to extend this line. However, I will do my method of moving it and then extending it. and finally placing it back using the snaps. The final construction line we need will run along the top of the cap and the front face of the back wall at this portion. As you can see, this line is kind of phasing into and out of the view, and that's because they lie right on top of each other in the model. So you might have to zoom in or zoom out in order to get the desired line selected. With all of our lines in place, ready to create a surface, I will now turn off the end bent concrete level and use the Place Smart Line tool to create our surface. We can again use the Extrude Along tool under the modeling workflow solids to create our 3D chunk. I will now turn back on the end bent concrete level and get the 3D element in place so that we can use the trim tool. Now that the 3D element is in place, you can use the trim tool to subtract out that portion of the front face of the back wall. Next, let's extend the cheek wall to meet the newly cut portion of the back wall. Let's start by turning back on the cheek wall level and drawing some new construction lines. I'm creating these construction lines by tracing lines on top of the cheek wall line work that was already generated by OBM. I'm tracing the lines, moving them off into space, extending them, and then placing them back. I've also replaced the 15-foot line that was used for the extrusion along path from before. The next line we'll need is a vertical line at the inside face of the cheek wall and the radial portion of the back wall. It's worth noting that view 1 is probably going to be much easier when it comes to creating this line. I'm going to actually select the vertical line, which you can't see right now because it is in the plane of the view. However, if I do my blue select, you can see here that one element is selected, which is that vertical line, which is right now just showing as a point. I will copy it at that node and I will drag it over to this new point right here, which again is the intersection of the inside face of the cheek wall and the radial portion of the back wall. Now that I've copied it, we can go to view 2 to see if it has been copied correctly, to which it looks like it has. Now that all of our construction lines are properly in place, we can construct the surface and unite to the end bent cheek wall. Before we move on to the next part of the end bent modifications, I wanted to briefly discuss this line that you're seeing here in the 3D element that was created. Sometimes these lines pop up when the geometry is not perfect. I've checked and double checked, and also these lines can pop up when everything else is perfect, but for some reason OBM has a bit of an issue generating some of the solids. So if you see something like this in your model, no need to worry. As long as it's not egregious, or if you've checked and double checked and everything seems fine, then there is no cause to not continue moving forward. With that squared away, we can now move on to the next part of modifying the indent. But first, let's delete some construction lines that are no longer in use. Let's now draw the remaining construction lines necessary for the next step. We now have all the construction lines necessary to draw our surface. Let's now draw our surface. Trim our line using the Extend Line tool. And then use Extrude Along to create our 3D element. Now that the 3D element has been generated, we can use the Unite tool to connect it with the end bent. The final modifications necessary for the end bent will be the vertical and horizontal lug as necessary for interaction between the end bent and the MSE wall. Let's start with the vertical lug. Let's start by adjusting the shown construction line to match the exact limits of the line it's traced onto, and by making a copy of that line down 15 feet. Let's edit the properties of that new line to have a Z elevation of 105 feet. Next, we will use the Extend Line tool to extend that line 6 inches beyond the back face of the back wall. And we will also copy this vertical line to the front face of the cap. We can continue by trimming the bottom line as shown, making a parallel copy of that line 5.5 inches away, and then going to view 1 to copy the vertical line to that point. Let's go back to view 2 and trim our line again. Next, let's copy 2 more vertical lines as shown. Finally, let's go back to view 1 to copy in our last construction lines. At this point and this point. Let's extend this line up. Now we can draw this construction line shown. Now that most of our lines are in place, we can draw a few more extensions, create a surface, and then extrude along a path. Next, let's extend these 2 lines as shown. Remember, if you're having a hard time selecting the line, as you see I am in this clip, make sure to turn off the end bent concrete level so you can better select it. Now we have all the points necessary to draw our surface using the Smart Line tool. However, we still need to draw a path for the extrusion. This path will be from the top of the back wall to the bottom of the cap plus 6 inches. Now, let's create our surface and extrude along for the vertical lug. We can now unite this with the rest of the end vent. Next, let's prepare and create our surface for the horizontal lug and also extrude along a path. Let's start by drawing this line shown here on the front face of the cap. Next, let's copy that line down 6 inches. We can now draw our surface and the path. Let's unite this with the rest of the end vent. That brings us to the end of all the modifications needed for this end vent. Now, all the construction lines can either be deleted or turned off. This is our final product. Thank you for watching this section of the training series for FDOT Connect. Additional training videos and course guides are available on the CAD Office Training webpage, which may be found at fdot.gov/CADD.